In the least surprising story of the week, Brandon Thurston and John Pollock had a story this week on the Post Wrestling website alleging that ESPN dropped WWE letter grades from its PLE reviews on their website after pushback from WWE. This, according to multiple sources. Here's the story. ESPN put a stop to letter grades in its editorial reviews of WWE premium live events after WWE's objections, according to multiple sources familiar with the matter. Letter grades rating a pro wrestling show may seem inconsequential. Whether a content provider, though, like WWE, can influence the editorial practices of a major broadcast partner like ESPN is a more significant issue. WWE's involvement in the removal of the letter grades was first reported by the Wrestling Observer newsletter last week, citing someone on the WWE side had gotten the letter grades killed. An ESPN spokesperson declined to provide comments for this report. However, one source with knowledge of ESPN's approach maintained that the decision to discontinue letter grades was ESPN's alone and that WWE did not request the change. When pressed to explain the reasoning for the removal of grades and whether WWE took issue with the reviews, the source declined to respond further. WWE did not return inquiries from Post, including a request to respond to whether the company expressed discomfort with any aspect of the PLE reviews that included letter grades on ESPN.com. The reviews were written by ESPN Combat Sports reporter Andreas Hale, covering the same premium live events whose broadcast rights ESPN recently acquired in a 5-year, $1.6 billion media deal, bringing WWE's biggest events to streaming platform ESPN Unlimited. The first PLE as part of that deal, WrestlePalooza, on September 20th, received a C grade in Hale's review. Hale went on to review the following month's Crown Jewel in October, giving it an overall B grade. Since then, Hale has published post-event reviews of WWE PLEs, but without letter grades applied to the event overall or the matches individually, as he had done before. It's worth noting that Hale's reviews of UFC events also use letter grades and have continued to as recently as this past weekend's UFC 326 event. That's a key point right there. The article says his UFC reviews have consistently used letter grades, including while ESPN held UFC broadcast rights and well before August of 2025, when it was announced that UFC would leave ESPN in favor of Paramount. ESPN's decision contrasts with promises made by executives at the beginning of its new relationship with WWE. On a media call on September 17th, just before the $325 million per year deal went into effect, ESPN executives were asked if ESPN's reporters would still have full independence in how they cover WWE. Senior Vice President of ESPN Plus, John Lasker, was very clear. I think the answer to that is an emphatic yes. The other executive on the call, then Vice President of Programming and Acquisitions, Matt Kenny, who moved to CBS Sports in October, agreed, saying unequivocal yes. That's separation of church and state. However, in their roles, Lasker and Kenny were not necessarily overseeing ESPN's journalistic work. Post Wrestling contacted ESPN's editorial leadership for comment, but they did not provide statements. Hale authored a piece with original comments from Seth Rollins, which ran on September 18th, 2 days before WrestlePalooza, the event Hale gave a mixed review to. Since then, ESPN's digital reporters, who previously had frequent access to WWE talent, have not had one new story with original comments from WWE talent. An ESPN spokesperson did not respond to a question about whether ESPN reporters on the editorial side have recently had difficulty getting access to talent. The source with knowledge of ESPN's approach contended that there have been no issues with access, pointing to WWE talent appearing on ESPN's televised broadcasts. However, the source did not provide, and we could not find any, example of recent access granted to ESPN's digital editorial staff for original reporting or interviews since September. WWE's influence over ESPN's coverage of its PLEs follows the company's move this past summer to discontinue its post-PLE press conferences, ending a multi-year practice that gave media direct access to talent and rare access to Chief Content Officer Paul Levesque. Yes, the same Paul Levesque who chose to give Jackie Redmond an interview backstage at Gorilla after Elimination Chamber in Chicago rather than go out in front of the fans as he has done in the past for those post-show panels. Now he hides himself away. You know, Andreas Hale, he gave that WrestlePalooza show a C grade. He was spot on with that. There are some people who think he was being generous with that C grade. I remember thinking, I think it's actually fair. Maybe I would have gone C+, but I thought he was bang on with that. But it became trending news after that. Oh my God. I mean, the guy who writes for ESPN gave it a C. And clearly WWE didn't like that. So they applied pressure to make sure it didn't happen again. There's no other conclusion really to be drawn here. It was ultimately ESPN's call to make, but they made it because they didn't want to anger WWE. If it was an ESPN issue or if it was a TKO issue, they wouldn't be giving grades for UFC shows. It's pathetic. It really is. It's not a coincidence that they haven't been given access to WWE talent for any website stuff since then. Right? That's not a coincidence. And if WWE wasn't behind it, and they really don't care, there's one very simple fix to all this. You pick up the phone and you tell ESPN to allow them to bring back the letter grades. That's all they have to do, right? Separation of church and state. That's what ESPN said before the deal started. Prove it. That's how you do it. You don't listen to people like JBL, who said the writer should have gotten creative and found a way to give the show an A grade, even if he didn't actually believe it deserved an A. Because this was their ESPN debut, and they shouldn't be criticizing the show. This is what the man said. And you know that there are people in WWE who feel the same way, right? You know it. He said this while filling in for Bruce Pritchard on Pritchard's podcast, okay? The same Bruce Pritchard who works on the WWE creative team. And you're going to tell me there aren't people there who don't follow the same groupthink that JBL does? All he did was say the quiet part out loud. Instead of posting fake grades for a shitty show, why not use it as motivation to make the shows better? Right? You're never going to be able to please everyone all the time, but that was an objectively poor debut for their first ESPN show. And most of their ESPN shows since then have not been much better. Lying about them and pretending they're great is not going to make them any better. WWE is well within its rights to withhold talent from interviews with ESPN.com if that's what they want to do. If they want to be petty about it, then they have the right to be petty about it. But then people deserve to know what's going on here. They deserve to be put on blast for it. But again, if they have nothing to do with any of this, and this was ESPN making a judgment call, right, so as not to piss off their new partner, one phone call from Nick Khan or one phone call from Paul Levesque is all it takes to reverse this. I won't hold my breath on that. My lungs aren't that strong.